of the things that causes guys to want to act out, to escape. They feel ashamed of some aspect of their life. They don't feel worthy. They feel like an imposter. And in order to escape that, because it's a very unpleasant experience, it's one of the most unpleasant, to feel like you're inherently flawed and broken, to feel like you're an outcast. And if people knew the truth about you, they would cast you out of the tribe. And it's an incredibly painful emotional experience. And so in order to escape, people act out with their drug of choice, whether it's junk food or porn or video games or money or prostitutes. I mean, it can run the gamut. It's really everything. And so understanding that it's a driver and understanding that it also exacerbates addiction, that when you don't want to be seen, then you act out and you feel worse about yourself. And so you need to act out and escape again. And it's a downward spiral. When a guy goes to a men's group and realizes that a lot of other guys are struggling with the same thing, and he's not the only one who has it all on the outside, but is silently struggling with some of these things on the inside, just that alone does so much of the work. Just to see that you're not the only one, and you're not alone, and you're not a monster. Hey guys, today's episode is a rebroadcast from An Evolving Man, a podcast hosted by Piers Cross. You might recognize Piers from a recent episode I did on this show where he was my guest. He was kind enough to have me on his podcast as well, and this is that conversation. What made this one really special is that Piers also has a history in Buddhist monasteries, so we could go deeper into the philosophy side of things than I usually do. We talk about neuroplasticity, the nature of craving, the 6 sense doors of mindfulness, and a concept from Buddhism I don't get asked about often enough, hiri and ottappa, which are what the Buddhist tradition calls the 2 great protectors of the world. The idea that moral shame and moral dread, when used skillfully, are actually guardians rather than enemies. We also get into the attention economy, how technology companies have engineered their products to be as addictive as slot machines, and what it actually looks like to reclaim your attention in a world that's designed to steal it. If you're drawn to the more philosophical and contemplative side of this work, this one is definitely for you. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Piers Cross on the Evolving Man podcast.
Okay, welcome to episode 164 of An Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm excited to be speaking to Jeremy Lipkowitz. Jeremy is an executive coach, meditation teacher, leadership facilitator, and founder of Unhooked Academy. After overcoming addiction and depression in his early 20s through meditation, he left a doctoral program at Duke University and spent time as a Buddhist monk in Asia. Today, he helps high-achieving men break free from destructive habits, cultivate emotional intelligence, and build lives of greater purpose, discipline, and fulfillment. Drawing on neuroscience, mindfulness, behavioral psychology, and leadership development, Jeremy works with executives, entrepreneurs, and professionals seeking lasting transformation. Welcome, Jeremy.
Happy to be here.
So how I like to begin the podcast is just for you to share a little bit of your journey. And you're obviously working now with men, executives around porn and addiction. What was part of your journey to get into working in that area?
It starts with my own journey, particularly around porn and porn addiction. I started looking at porn when I was in, I guess maybe 8, 9, 10 years old is when I start remembering seeing things that were slightly pornographic. It wasn't hardcore porn at the time, but it was just things like the lingerie catalogs that would come in the mail, Victoria's Secret catalogs, and then starting to get into porn as I got into middle school and high school and college. And it just slowly became a deeply ingrained habit that I had, that I was watching it on a daily basis when I got to college. And it was there that I started to notice some of the ways it was impacting my life, my relationships, my sense of self-worth and well-being, also the ways it was impacting focus and just my mind and clarity. So it was around then that I started to just examine how it was impacting me, and was fortunate through a series of unfortunate accidents to stumble across Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy. And that just completely transformed my life. It was a complete 180. It wasn't just about the porn I was watching, but I started to also get some insight into the way I was showing up in the world and how I was leading my life, maybe some of the ways I was living out of integrity or just not pursuing kind of a strategy that was actually leading to happiness and fulfillment. I was chasing all the wrong things without realizing it. Unfortunately, some of this Buddhist philosophy turned me around and showed me that there was a healthier way to approach life. And also that it didn't have to be, this kind of fluffy spiritual thing. I didn't have to become a Buddhist with a capital B. It was really just a way of training the mind and approaching life differently. So that was in my early 20s and just totally changed my life. And the rest is history, I suppose. And I can talk more about any of those aspects, whatever you're curious about.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, before we began the Buddhism side of things, obviously, that was my own big journey from breakdown, suicide, being homeless for a period of time, that Buddhism really saved my life. I wouldn't be here without it. And, I went to the monastery 2002 and I struggled with drink and drugs, and I haven't had a drink since then and drugs. So it's like totally, like you said, 180. So I'd love for you to share a bit of how that impacted you. What were some of the changes?
Mm. Well, the first introduction I really had to what Buddhism really is, and what I mean by that is that before I started reading about it, I had a lot of misconceptions about Buddhism. I thought it was just like any other religion, that you had to believe in some god called the Buddha. I thought you had to believe in reincarnation. I thought karma was this magical thing that, if you tell a lie to your neighbor, then a piano is going to fall on your cat. And that was the law of karma. And so I had all these misconceptions about Buddhism that kept me from ever really getting interested in it. But when I had this experience in college where I started to notice the way that porn was impacting my life, and it really caused me to have an existential crisis of sorts. I just realized that porn had totally warped my brain, was causing a lot of suffering in my life. And I had this existential crisis of wondering if I was ever going to be happy, because in my life, I had almost everything I wanted, everything I desired, I could put my mind to and accomplish or attain. Whatever test I wanted to do well in, whatever sports activity, I could always accomplish it. I was a very high achieving young man. And I kept getting these things and it didn't make me happy. I kept getting the best test scores. I kept getting the girlfriend, getting the sports accolades, and none of it gave me any lasting satisfaction. And so I had this moment of bit of turmoil, wondering, okay, if I keep getting all these things that I want, but none of it makes me happy, will I ever be happy? Mm-hmm. And that got me interested in what happiness really is. And I started reading books on positive psychology and things of that nature. Eventually found this book by a Tibetan monk. His name is Matthieu Ricard, and he wrote this book called Happiness. And that book, hey, there we go. Yeah. So that book fundamentally changed my life completely and gave me so many insights into the nature of my own suffering and the hole that I had been digging myself in, and also how to climb out of that hole. One of the most important things that I learned from reading that book was really understanding neuroplasticity. And I remember there was this quote somewhere in the book where he talked about neuroplasticity, and he quoted this neuroscientist that said, neurons that fire together wire together. And it made me realize that thought patterns are not these things that you're born with. They're things that you train and get stronger over time, depending on how you live your life. And so if you're constantly thinking angry thoughts, you're more likely to strengthen those neural pathways and think angry thoughts in the future. The same goes for lust. If you're constantly engaging with lust and looking at porn and objectifying women, you're strengthening those neural pathways. And that was a huge light bulb moment for me, because I also realized this from the help of the book and in the Buddhist tradition, is that the act of lusting after something you don't have is a state of suffering.
Mm.
And so I realized that every time I engaged with lusting after porn or lusting after women, craving it and thinking, if I just had this, then I would be happy, that was what suffering was. And I was creating all this suffering in my life because I was always looking at what I didn't have rather than being grateful or content for what I did have. So I just started to realize after reading these books on Buddhism, how much of my life was centered around craving and dissatisfaction and discontent. And fortunately, the flip side, which they talk about in Buddhism, is you can also use the understanding of the mind to cultivate the things that directly lead to happiness. If you want to be filled with gratitude, strengthen the neural pathways and the mental qualities of gratitude. And that's, in essence, what meditation is. It's these, strengthening of different mental qualities that lead to happiness and fulfillment and compassion. So that it just blew my mind, because before that I was always focused on the outside, on the external. Could I get the better grade? Could I get the better girlfriend? This and that. And Buddhism really showed me that a lot of, if not all of happiness is what's on the inside and how you're relating to life. So there was just a mind-blowing experience for me reading some of these books.
Thank you. Yeah, Matthieu Ricard's book is brilliant. I've used it so much over the years just to go, okay, I'm really suffering at the moment. What does he say? It's like anger. What am I? Oh yeah, I'm feeling angry. I can't remember what he said. The antidote to anger is forgotten now, but I'd go through the different antidotes going, yeah, okay, I'm feeling really angry, right? And forgiveness or whatever. So yeah, it's fascinating. So I guess moving forward is this thing of craving. What did you find was the best system for? Because I think that's the big thing, as you just said, behind porn is that craving. What was one of the best things? You mentioned meditation. Was there anything else breaking that addiction to the craving?
Anything besides meditation. What was interesting, I think, for me is that in the beginning, it was all meditation and Buddhist philosophy. It was really just, and this is where my story diverges from what most people will do nowadays. I mean, most people aren't going to, travel to India and spend a few months there, visiting monasteries and going on silent retreats. But I was lucky enough to have that opportunity when I started to have these realizations and these insights. I was able to go to India and spend a few months there. And so for me, it was just, all meditation all the time. And that really was my pathway to recovery and breaking free. Now I realize that there are much faster and better and more sustainable approaches to recovery, that having a meditation only approach to breaking free from any addiction isn't kind of the one I would recommend for most people. And, the things that actually help me now and that I would recommend for anyone getting started are things like building community, getting connected with other people, being of service, looking at your environment and how you're living your life. I mean, these are the things that now I focus on. But in the beginning, I was just fully transfixed. I'd caught the bug of Buddhism, and very fortunate. I mean, it allowed me to go very deep in my practice. But yeah, these days it's much more around living a healthy life and building community and being of service to others, and the occasional meditation as well. Keep the mind healthy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So let's invite us to have a look at porn, what you see at the moment happening in the world globally with porn. I know that it's changed so much over the years, but I'd love you to, because it's one of these subjects that no one will talk about, or very few people.
Yeah. It's almost hilarious if it weren't so sad, the fact that it is so common and so prevalent and so impactful on our society, on young men and non-young men, middle-aged men as well. It impacts everyone. And not to mention young women as well. I mean, everybody is kind of watching it, getting influenced by it. And so it's almost ironic how little we talk about it, despite how impactful it is and how prevalent it is. It's one of these very strange things that it's both hyper normalized in the sense that everybody kind of knows that porn is widely available and most people watch it, and it's normalized in that sense of, oh, it's just porn. What's the big deal? And at the same time, it's shamed and stigmatized and brushed under the rug and swept into the closet, and we don't look at it or talk about it because it's a taboo topic. We're not allowed to talk about porn. And so it's this very strange thing where it's normalized, but it's also shamed and taboo to talk about. And it's because of that it causes a lot of problems, because people don't have safe spaces to talk about the nuances of how it's impacting people. You know, men don't have the space to say, hey, you know, I have been watching porn and I don't know if it really aligns with my values. I feel out of integrity when I watch it, or I know I should watch less, but I just, you know, I can't stop. And so in the absence of these kind of conversations, a lot of mental problems can develop around it in isolation. And it has changed. You know, you kind of started off by saying, how has it changed? It's changed dramatically from what it used to be, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It used to be pictures and magazines, and you had to, maybe you got a new magazine once a month, or you had to go out and find something, or, you know, it was challenging to get it.
Yeah, have the courage to go, God, it's my local news agent.
Yeah, right.
See if I can do it. And then, are you 18? And then the embarrassment and the shame. And so, yeah, it wasn't easy then.
Yeah. And now, I mean, everybody has a smartphone and you can get high speed, hardcore internet pornography, you know, some of the most, you know, quite vile stuff, even. And a 7-year-old kid can get it with an infinite variety simply by pulling out his phone. And he doesn't have to talk to anyone, doesn't have to get any, you know, kind of not validation, but approval. He doesn't have to go to a newsstand and say, hey, can I get this magazine? It's just instantly there. So it's a wild west out there right now in terms of what the industry is. And another thing that a lot of people don't realize just how big the industry is. The porn industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is bigger. The porn industry is bigger than all of the sports leagues in the US combined. So that the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, if you take all the sports leagues in the US, porn industry is still a bigger industry than all of them. And people don't realize that. They think it's this kind of innocent thing in the background, but there's a big industry behind it that is making money off of your attention. And there's a lot of incentive to keep you hooked and keep you addicted.
I remember doing some research into this. Maybe it was 20 odd years ago. And the figure then was that the porn industry was bigger than the car industry.
Mm.
You know, obviously everything's changed since then. That was, 20 odd years ago. But then I was shocked going, God, it's big. And I couldn't quite understand it. And now, I mean, I did some research about 10 years ago, and I listened to some TED Talks, and there was a professor saying they tried to do a study into it, and they had, a control group where people who weren't looking at porn, and they had to give the study up because they couldn't find a control group. Everyone was looking at it.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's how bad a problem it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was just shocked. And it's interesting. My own journey with porn is similar to yours. Obviously, in the monastery, I was celibate, so I didn't see porn during that time. Then I came out of the monastery. I watched porn again. But then I showed some porn to my wife one time, and she looked at it and she was like, oh, this is disgusting. And that was the last time I looked at it, and that was probably 15 years ago. And it was, okay, enough. That's time. It's done. But it's changed so much in those 15 years from what I hear from researchers.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, wildly different, from what it was 15 years ago, because it's just growing in terms of the, how addictive it is and how smart these companies are at getting you hooked and addicted, and, the shorter attention spans that people have. And the more we know so much about addiction now, that it's not, you know, if you're addicted to porn or sex, it's not because you're some sexual deviant or pervert. It's any addiction stems from other issues going on in your life that you're trying to fill the void with. And so it's usually around things like loneliness or insecurity or fear or depression, or lack of connection. And all of these things are on the rise. I mean, the amount of loneliness, lack of social connection, financial insecurity and fear around, what the future will bring. There's so many things that are exacerbating the state of addiction in the world. And people have easy access to porn. And so it's one of the fastest growing out there.
in one of the podcasts, you mentioned this idea that if you had a cocaine addiction and you had to carry around a bag of cocaine in your pocket all the time, it would be difficult to give up the cocaine. I'd love you to share a little bit about why it is so difficult for us to give up porn.
Yeah. I mean, that's the analogy I like to give. You could talk about cocaine, or let's say alcohol, if alcohol is your thing. But let's say you're addicted to some substance and you have to carry that substance with you wherever you go. And that's in many ways what it's like to be addicted to porn, because it's easily available and accessible and free on everyone's phone, and everyone has a phone in their pocket. And so it's just the accessibility. There's something called the 3 A's of porn addiction. It's these 3 things that make porn highly addictive. And it's true for any drug, any drug or substance or behavior that has these 3 A's. The more that they have them, the more addictive it's going to be. So the 3 A's are the affordability, the accessibility, and the anonymity. So the affordability is, the cheaper a drug is, the more likely it's going to be something that you can use as, your source of addiction and escape. If a drug costs $10,000 every time you want to take a hit, it's very unlikely you're going to develop an addiction to it, because it's too costly. The closer you get to zero, the easier it is to get addicted. If something is 30 cents every time you want to take a hit, okay, it's easy. If it's free, very much so. The same goes with accessibility. If something is highly inaccessible, if you have to climb a mountain every time you want to get your drug, again, you're not likely to fall into an addiction with it. But if it's in your pocket and freely accessible wherever you are, more likely that in those times of crisis or depression or loneliness, you're going to reach for it if it's easily accessible. And then the anonymity part, it solves the shame complex. If you don't have to talk to anybody to get your substance, if you don't have to show your face, if you can do it completely anonymously and nobody knows, it's easy to go into a hole with that addiction. And porn has all 3. I mean, it's free, it's highly accessible, you can do it completely anonymously. And the other, reason that porn is such a, there's a couple other reasons. I mean, I could go on about this forever, but a couple of the other reasons. One is the amount of novelty that is important. I mean, with something like alcohol, once you've had a certain number of drinks, you can't drink anymore. You pass out. Yeah. With porn, because what you're addicted to is some new image on a screen, this is why people can sit there for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours watching porn, because every time they see a new scene or search for a new topic, it gives them that dopamine hit. And so the infinite amount of novelty and variety is one of the reasons that people can stay hooked for so long, and it can get so deeply ingrained. The other issue is just because of how important sexuality is for us as humans. I mean, it's a deeply beautiful part of being human, our sexuality and our sexual desires, and it's a beautiful thing. And so it's hard to untangle that for a lot of people. They think, well, how can I stop? I mean, I can't cut off my sexuality. So it's another issue that people face, is they don't know how to find that balance.
Mm-hmm. What do you suggest to people to find that balance, that it reopens to becoming a beautiful thing again?
Yeah. The first and most important thing is to give yourself some time away from the substance so that you can actually have a clearer view and perspective of how it has been impacting you over the last few years, if not decades, if not your whole lifetime. I mean, for many men, it starts so young that they don't know what their life is like without it. Most of the guys I work with, unless they've spent time in a monastery where they just couldn't access it, most of them have been watching their entire life and they can't remember the last time they went a few days without watching it. And so it's like that wonderful metaphor. If you talk to a fish and you say, "How's the water?" And he says, "What water?"
Mm.
Because he's been swimming in it his whole life. He doesn't know there's what water is. It's the same with guys in porn. And you say, "How is porn impacting your relationships?" You say, "What are you talking about?" "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been watching it my whole life. It hasn't impacted my relationship." So it's only when you take a break and really give yourself time to have some distance from that substance and behavior that you can actually start to see how it's been impacting your relationships, your confidence, your mental clarity, your sense of well-being. And so many people, when they do this, when they take a break, when they have, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months away from porn, they start to realize all of these things that are coming back into their life, sometimes for the first time. Less brain fog, more confidence in themselves, more sense of integrity in their life. So many things that change. So that's the first thing I would recommend, is to take some distance from it and see how it changes your life.
Mm-hmm. How easy do people find that, to take that distance?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, it's easier said than done. I mean, it's incredibly challenging for a lot of guys. I mean, for a lot of guys, it is their main coping mechanism. It is the main tool that they use to deal with any kind of unpleasant emotion. It is their pacifier. And a lot of guys don't know what to do when an unpleasant emotion comes up. And this is, again, so much of my views on this relate to Buddhism. But when I say unpleasant emotion, it's really any unpleasant. A lot of guys think, oh, it's just around, I'm feeling horny, and that's why I look at porn. And it has nothing to do with that most of the time. It's all these other things that people don't even realize they're running away from.
Mm.
So boredom is a huge one. People don't realize boredom is an unpleasant emotional experience. And a lot of times on a subconscious level, they're trying to run away from it. They don't even realize it. Boredom comes and they think, oh, I don't like how this feels. Let me do something to distract myself from this unpleasant emotion. So they run to porn. It could be anything: loneliness, stress, anxiety, fear, jealousy. It could be anything, perhaps. Another one is a lack of purpose. A lot of guys struggle with just a lack of meaning or a lack of purpose in their life. They've got the job, they've got the car, they've got the money, but they feel like they have no purpose. And that can be another thing that people want to run away from. And so they use pleasure as a way to cope. And so one of the important first steps is not just to try to stop, but to actually understand the addiction before you try to stop, because you have to understand what you're working with. Otherwise, you won't realize why you keep going back to it. And I think that's really important for a lot of people to hear, is because a lot of people, they try to stop watching porn or any addiction, and they don't realize why they started getting addicted to it in the first place. And so when they stop and it doesn't work, they just think, oh, well, I'm just not strong enough. But the real path to overcoming it is really to understand why you're doing it in the first place, understanding the mind and looking at the dynamics of the mind. That, in my perspective, at least, that's my approach, and worked for me. It worked for a lot of the guys that I work with in this.
Ah, so it's like understanding the fear, understanding the boredom, understanding those triggers. And it sounds like, that idea of emotional intelligence. Been reading Jim Dethmer's book, The 15 commitments of conscious leadership, and the third commitment is around emotional intelligence, about feeling things. And most of us, as men and women, we don't want to feel. And when we feel, I think it's Jill Bolt Taylor who says, it only lasts for 90 seconds when we fully feel a feeling. But because we don't ever give ourselves permission to feel, it's just low level all our lives. And it's like we're just running away from, oh my God, I can't feel this. And actually, it's not. It's going to be unpleasant for that 90 seconds. I was driving to a men's workshop a few weeks ago, and there was some guy really close behind me. I could feel my anger rising, and I just did that practice. I was like, where is it? Okay, shoulder. And then it shifted really quickly. And that's what I see. It's like that, yeah, understanding the addiction, where it comes from.
And I love that, you just brought in just a very practical tool that people can do of just exploring, okay, where do I feel this in my body? Because a lot of people don't know where to start when it comes to giving space to their emotion or feeling an emotion. It's just this big, scary, vague concept. We hear it in a men's circle, oh, feel your emotion. And it's like, well, I don't know what that means. I don't know how to do it. Get out of here, right? And so just an easy way to ease yourself into it is to get curious and explore, okay, well, if it feels like an emotion is arising, maybe I can investigate, what does this feel like in my body? Oh, okay, I'm noticing, when I'm getting angry, I feel, tight in my chest and my fingers are clenching. Oh, okay, interesting. And already, that's, giving some space for the emotion to be felt. So that's a great practice that guys can do, and really helpful for addiction recovery.
Yeah. I think I said this to a client a few weeks ago, this idea of just, even if it's 5 minutes, you pause, you breathe, you feel what you're feeling, and then you go and do the same thing, the behavior you were going to do, but just give yourself that 5 minutes before. And actually, a lot of time after a while, you don't want to. I think I heard a story, this was probably 20 years ago, of someone who would just eat McDonald's all the time. And the advice to him was to just eat it really slowly. And because the guy said, I don't want to stop eating McDonald's. And his coach said, no, you're fine. Just keep eating McDonald's. Just eat it slowly. I think within 2 days, he realized how disgusting it was, because he was eating it slowly and chewing. It was like, oh, stop eating McDonald's. And
they've done studies, very similar to this around smoking cessation. And they found out, that when you tell people to stop smoking and, okay, put it in your effort to stop smoking, it has a certain success rate associated with it. But when they changed the prompt and they said, you can smoke as much as you like, but your task is just to really be present for the experience of smoking, to be really mindful and aware and notice the smells, the sensations, and just be present as you smoke. And you don't have to stop or limit it at all. And they found out that kind of more mindfulness-based approach was much more successful at helping people stop smoking. And so that kind of acceptance-based strategy of just being present for the experience can really be helpful.
Thank you. And how much of your practice when you're working with people or as part of your Unhooked Academy do you use mindfulness?
It's a core part of the work that I do with the guys in my community. Maybe we meditate together in every group call, has some meditation in it. It's a core piece. I'm not there to convert anyone to Buddhism. There's nothing to convert to, but it's almost, you can't escape the fact that having self-awareness is the foundation for recovery. You have to start to know what's going on and stop living in the dark. Because when you're living in the dark, you're living in the passenger seat and there's somebody else driving the bus. And so the way I frame it is, just, you got to start to explore your mind and start to have some self-awareness. And mindfulness is a really powerful way of doing that. On top of the fact that it also gives you some really powerful tools in your tool belt around impulse control and compassion and equanimity and all these other amazing mental qualities and traits that Buddhism has to offer. So yeah, mental, I wouldn't say that mindfulness on its own, but mental training, just training your mind, because so much of addiction is in the mind. It's all about how we're relating to things and what the subconscious is doing. And so you've got to learn how to work with it.
If someone comes to you or in your community who has shame, that so many of us do, what's our way out of being stuck in shame? And, and I see this a lot in my work with leaders, is we beat ourselves up, that inner critic, and it just becomes a trap because we do the thing, we feel bad, we beat ourselves up, and then we do it again. So what are some of the systems you've found, Jeremy, to help people with overcoming shame?
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, I was smiling when you were asking the question, and the reason I was smiling is that you said, if somebody comes and if they have shame, and I don't know if I've ever met a single person who hasn't come with some component of shame. It is so common for all of us, and I think that alone is really healing. It's one of the reasons why when a guy goes to a men's group and realizes that a lot of other guys are struggling with the same thing, and he's not the only one who has it all on the outside, but is silently struggling with some of these things on the inside, just that alone does so much of the work. Just to see that you're not the only one, and you're not alone, and you're not a monster. And so I think that's what's really helpful is just to be in some kind of a men's group, some kind of intentional community where you can realize that you're not the only one struggling with whatever it is that you're struggling with. And that common humanity of realizing that you're not the only one does a lot of the work of healing shame. But it is a vicious cycle. I mean, it is one of the biggest exacerbators of addiction. It's one of the things, drivers and exacerbators. It's one of the things that causes guys to want to act out, to escape. They feel ashamed of some aspect of their life. They don't feel worthy. They feel like an imposter. And in order to escape that, because it's a very unpleasant experience, it's one of the most unpleasant, to feel like you're inherently flawed and broken, to feel like you're an outcast, and if people knew the truth about you, they would cast you out of the tribe. And it's an incredibly painful emotional experience. And so in order to escape, people act out with their drug of choice, whether it's junk food or porn or video games or money or prostitutes. I mean, it can run the gamut. It's really everything. And so understanding that it's a driver, and understanding that it also exacerbates addiction, that when you don't want to be seen, then you act out and you feel worse about yourself. And so you need to act out and escape again. And it's a downward spiral. So getting connected to a safe space, a safe community where you can talk about what you're going through and admit to it and take ownership of it and not be judged or shamed for it, is one of the best things you can do for shame. I really think it's the key. And I don't think there's any medicine better than that, being in community.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. It's almost like, because, say, as you said, the 3 A's, it's the anonymity. Therefore, we never talk about it. We think we're the only one. And then when we come
Yeah.
into the community and we're like, and I have this a lot around my community of boarding school and boarding school syndrome. It's high performers or people who've been to boarding school, and they think they're the only ones who are struggling. And when they meet fellow people who have been through the same experience, suddenly it's like, oh my God, it's not just me. This is a common, syndrome. And it sounds like it's the same with porn addiction. Is like suddenly you're in a community and you're like, oh, you have the same issue as me. It's like that weight
I would
is
say,
not.
yeah. And I would say even more important with things like porn addiction and sex addiction, because it is such a it brings so much shame to so many people. It's such a sensitive topic for so many people. It's one of the biggest, darkest secrets for most guys in their life. There's something about sexual compulsive behaviors, whether it's porn or sex, that is deeply shameful for a lot of guys. I mean, it's different for, you can talk about, oh, I'm an alcoholic in recovery, and people will clap and, hey, good for you. That's amazing. If you go to a party and say, hey, I'm a recovering porn addict or recovering sex addict, you kind of wonder, are people going to look at you differently? It's not quite the same kind of, oh, hey, man, that's amazing. It is changing now, where people are kind of being a little more open about this, and there is more acceptance of it. But it is just an inherently shameful thing for some reason, our sexuality. And so even more so, the benefits of breaking down the shame and opening up and realizing you're not alone.
It's interesting. Quite a few people I've spoken to on the podcast is about child sexual abuse. And it's often said, if you're hit as a child, you will go and tell the teacher or your parents, I've been hit by someone. If you're sexually abused, only 1 in 9 will actually come forward. And I feel it's the same reason. It's that shame. There's something wrong with me. It's somehow my fault. And a lot of society, it's changing now, but it has often put the onus on the child, saying, well, you asked for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't speak up. And certainly in Britain, I think it's changing slightly, but it's usually 27 years after you've been sexually abused before you will come forward. 27 years, so you're in your 40s or 50s.
Wow.
So it's interesting you say that about porn. It's similar, that there's that shame there.
Yeah.
So I'd love to kind of, it's a similar thing, but it's this idea of the inner critic there. Because I see this a lot with my audience, is like of giving ourselves a hard time. What do you say to people who come to you who you can obviously see are just giving themselves shame, beating themselves up? What's some of the practices that you found really helps someone in the critic?
I love this topic, and not for the reason most people think of. I love this topic because I'm also a big proponent of a healthy inner critic, or healthy shame as well. Kind of going back to the topic of shame, like there's a component to self-criticism. Maybe we wouldn't call it self-criticism, but to holding yourself to account and taking ownership and having healthy shame, that's actually really valuable. And so I like to just say that up front, because there's two sides to that story, that there is unhealthy, toxic shame, and there's toxic self-judgment and toxic self-criticism that doesn't do any good. And it's also one of the great protectors. I mean, in Buddhism, I remember hearing this fantastic teaching that there are these, what are called the 2 great protectors of the world. And in a lot of, Buddhism, it's all about, okay, what are wholesome mental qualities that we should cultivate, and what are the unwholesome or unskillful mental qualities that we should let go of? And all the wholesome ones are things like love, compassion, and patience, and equanimity, and these things that feel good inherently, like love and compassion and equanimity. They feel pleasant when we experience them. And all the unskillful mental qualities are things that feel unpleasant, anger, greed, jealousy, judgment. These things actually feel negative. They're an unpleasant experience. They burn us when we experience them. But there are these 2 exceptions, and they're known as the 2 great protectors. They're hiri and ottappa, which are moral dread and moral shame. And they're the 2 exceptions to the rule. They're the 2 wholesome, skillful mental qualities that feel unpleasant. And I find that fascinating, that they feel unpleasant, but they're skillful and they're wholesome. And we're meant to actually cultivate them. So like moral dread and moral shame, they're the things that help us reflect on our unskillful past behaviors and say, wow, I did cause harm. And that feels really unpleasant to remember that harm I caused. And that remembering of an unpleasant, an unskillful thing we did is actually a protection, because it helps stop us from doing it in the future. And I think we need more of that, particularly as men, that kind of remorse, where we say, yeah, I did cause harm with my sexuality. I did cause harm with my greed. I did cause harm with my violence or my anger. Let me feel the heaviness of that experience so that I don't do it again. So I like to just kind of add that in, because I don't think we should throw out, self-judgment or shame altogether. That being said, there is a lot of toxic self-judgment and self-criticism. And it all relates back to that shame as well, just this feeling of unworthiness. There's a great Western Buddhist teacher, Tara Brach, who talks about the trance of unworthiness. And it's so rampant. I mean, so many of us, myself included, have that feeling of unworthiness. Something's wrong with me. If people knew who I really was, they wouldn't like me. And it can just be so destructive. And so healing it is really important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I like that about the hiri and ottappa, about the healthy, what did you say, moral dread and moral shame. I think I did that quite a bit in the monastery, just reflecting back on some of the things I'd done, especially when I was wanting a drink, how I had been under drink. And it was like, it really helped me to go, do I really want to go back to drink? And do I really want to, for me, sex as well. It's like, do I want to go back to sex the old way? And just remembering some of the things I did and actually feeling that and processing that. Yeah, I found that useful.
And that's the moral dread, is the thinking about the future, So the moral shame is okay, when I did those things and it caused all this damage and harm. And then the moral dread is, okay, if I go back to drinking, if I go back to sex as an indulgence, and cause harm with it, wow, I have dread, I have fear about the morality, the ethics of that. It's powerful. It's a powerful protector.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I found that one of the things I've used a lot in my meditation is the Four Noble Truths, just to reflect through those. So there is suffering, dukkha, there is craving, tanha, and it's always, that's kind of been really useful just to feel, I really want this. And most of the time for me, it's really, I don't want this. It's like the feeling like, and I found that really useful. And then the third noble truth, that there is an end to this suffering. This is the way it is. And that often when I'm in meditation, that really helps to release that. And it sounds like the hiri and the ottappa is, again, a lovely meditation to do. Lovely. Okay, it's not going to be unpleasant, but transformative is maybe a better word for it, to release that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in its own way, it becomes pleasant. It's one of the ways of transforming something that is just inherently an unpleasant experience into something that feels wholesome and uplifting in its own way. It's still unpleasant to remember the harm you've caused, but it can actually be, if you can shift your perspective of, oh, this is a guardian looking out for me. And this is here to make sure I stay on a good path and prevent me from causing more harm in the future. Oh, how grateful I am that I have this guardian on my shoulder. And it can kind of transform it into something that feels, if not pleasant, at least a little more wholesome.
I can see that. So we've talked a lot about mindfulness, shame, craving. You mentioned a bit about attention, about how our attention span's so small at the moment. I'd like us to go a bit deeper into this attention economy, because I think, yes, we have it in porn, but we have it everywhere. Facebook, everyone's wanting our attention. I'd love for you to share a little bit about the attention economy and how that impacts addictions.
Yeah, I mean, we live in this world that is just so scattered. And so there's so much junk food for the mind. I mean, it just feels like we're living in this, in some ways, a dystopian future where our mind has just been turned to mush, and, everything is plasticky and superficial. And it's so rare to have genuine, nutritious, healthy food for the mind these days. And it's the water we swim in. It's just so pervasive that we don't even realize it anymore. There's this fantastic movie. Have you heard of the movie Idiocracy?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
It's worth a watch. It was made, I don't know, 20 years ago, by the creators of South Park. And it's kind of some guy gets put in a cryogenic chamber and wakes up 500 years later in the future. And the world, particularly the US, has just evolved into this state of idiocracy. And it's scary how much of it feels accurate in our modern society. But one of the interesting things is, water doesn't exist anymore, and everything is Gatorade. I mean, they water the plants with Gatorade, and Gatorade is the water. When people drink like from the water fountains, it's just Gatorade coming out. And it's kind of a trope on, the consumerism and big industry, and, big industry can take over the world and lobby and everything. But what's interesting is people just don't know the difference because that's what they're swimming in. And in some ways, we've kind of gotten to that place where we're swimming in distraction. I think another word, related to this, the attention economy, is distraction. We are so distracted all the time that so many of us feel unable to be with boredom and feel the need to constantly have some kind of stimulation, whether it's social media or news or email or, something. They did that experiment where they put people in a room and just locked them in a room, and they said you could sit here, and the only thing they had in that room was a little electric shocker that they could shock themselves with an electric buzz, like a painful electric shock. And they found out that people were so bored out of their minds that 99% of people preferred to shock themselves with an electric shocker rather than sit in silence in boredom. And some people, they had one guy who pressed it something like 50 times a minute because he just couldn't stand the boredom. And it's a helpful way of understanding the world we live in right now, is we're so unable to be without stimulation and distraction. It's so unable to be with the silence of our own mind that we seek for these distractions constantly. And it's never satisfying. So we need more and more, and it's grown every year. It just gets more and more pervasive. And on top of that, it's monetized by these industries that make money off of our attention because of ads on social media and Facebook and all these things.
Fascinating. I've not heard of the shocking one. I've heard of other similar things, but it's like, wow. I'd heard that Facebook, for example, had employed people from Las Vegas to help their platforms become addictive. So it was like a slot machine. You want to
there's a phenomenal, if anyone's interested in that, there's a phenomenal book called Irresistible by Adam Alter. And he does a deep dive into how these technology companies, how these social media companies, video game companies, how they engineer their products to be as addictive as possible. And they hire gambling experts to figure out exactly how to make things as addictive as possible. And it's where, for example, the kind of the infinite scroll function that many apps have, where you just kind of pull down and it keeps refreshing and reloading and showing you more and more. And that's similar to a slot machine. The little kind of circle waiting button is also part of the gambling thing. It gets you more hooked. Intermittent rewards is something that we get more addicted to. If every time you open up your social media app, if it just showed you a red notification every single time, you wouldn't get as addicted as if you open it up and sometimes you get a red notification and sometimes you don't. That intermittent hit or miss actually makes you more addicted. And so they engineered it that way where you're more likely to get addicted. So yeah, they are hiring the world's experts in how to capture your attention.
How do we claim our attention back, Jeremy?
Difficultly, not easily, I would say. But I mean, all the things that, we've already talked about, like, mindfulness, meditation, understanding what's going on in your mind, understanding the emotions behind wanting to escape, understanding what it is that you're running from when you compulsively reach for the phone. But also, the awareness just to see that you are reaching for the phone. Just that alone is so hard. And so that's where that momentum of self-awareness, the momentum of present moment awareness, where you can actually see, oh, I'm about to reach for my phone, gives you the opportunity to investigate what's behind it. If you don't have any awareness to see it happening, you can't investigate it. There's that famous quote attributed to Viktor Frankl. Have you heard of the between stimulus and response quote?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's actually not Viktor Frankl. It's actually Stephen Covey summarizing the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl.
Okay.
Little factoid there. But the quote, for anyone who hasn't heard it, is between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. And so we need to get access to that space between the stimulus and the response, between something happening and our reactive nature. If there's no space there, we just react habitually, which is usually grabbing the phone, grabbing a drink, opening up a porn site, whatever it is we habitually do. But if you can gain access to that space, and mindfulness is one of the best ways to do that, then you have the ability to choose how to respond differently. And that's where all of our growth and our freedom lies, is in choosing how to live our life.
Amazing. So if someone is listening to this, they've heard mindfulness, but they're not really sure what it is, what would you teach to that person?
Gosh, there's so many ways to talk about mindfulness, and none of them are, right or wrong. But, in one of its most basic ways of looking at it, it's just this ability to be aware of what's happening inside of you and outside of you in the present moment in a particular way, with a particular quality of that awareness, particular quality of the attention. Ideally, there's a bit of kind of discerning or non-judging aspect to it. You're actually just calmly observing without judgment of this is good or bad, but okay, this is what's arising. And hopefully with some curiosity towards the experience. Oh, what is this thing? And importantly, it's, internal and external. So you can be aware of sounds, sights, smells, but also aware of things going on internally. Aware of a bodily sensation, internal. Aware of a thought of the past or the future, or aware of an emotional state passing through you. Oh, anger is here. Or, I'm noticing some frustration. This is all mindfulness, that awareness of what's happening as it's happening, with the quality of curiosity and kindness. But you can start very simply. You can start just with paying attention to your breathing in that kind and curious way. And that then naturally grows out onto other things.
That's beautiful. I really love that description. Just becoming aware of inside, but also outside sounds, smells, tastes.
Yeah.
And also the inside.
I mean, in, the Buddhist tradition that we both come from, they often talk about mindfulness as the sixth sense door awareness. So I find that a very helpful way of describing it to people is you can just pay attention to what's happening at any of these 6 sense doors. So the 5 traditional senses of sight, smell, taste, hearing, physical touch in the body. And then also the 6th sense door of being aware of mental memories, words, flashes of images in your mind's eye. So any of those 6 arenas, if you can pay attention to any of those 6 senses, what's interesting is that's all of your whole life is just those 6 experiences kind of coming in and going out in different arrays. Very hard to find something outside of those 6. It's either a sight, smell, sound, hearing, touch, or it's a mental. It's your whole life.
It is. It makes it quite simple on one level.
Yeah, I find it a very helpful. I mean, sometimes in a meditation, I'll just kind of go through the 6 and say, okay, what do I notice when I'm looking? What am I seeing? What am I smelling? Am I hearing? Am I tasting? What do I feel in my body? And then open up to mental phenomenon. Can be a bit tricky for some people if you're not used to it. Like, oh, okay, well, what is that? But it's, starting with just noticing emotions. Oh, okay, I'm restless. I'm anxious, stressed. Giving that one word label is also very helpful. It can help to kind of put a frame around the experience so you can investigate it.
Amazing. So as we start wrapping up, is there some final thoughts that you'd love to share with people?
Nothing comes to mind. I mean, it's been a super fun conversation. I really appreciate, knowing that you have, kind of a very similar Buddhist background to me. It's been really fun to go a little bit more into the Buddhist philosophy side of things. So I've really enjoyed it. Nothing else really comes to mind of anything else I feel called to share.
Well, thank you for your time. And yeah, likewise, it's lovely to hear and have conversations. I've had 64 conversations. I've not had many around Buddhism, so it's lovely to delve deeper. So bless you for your work. And yeah, I love the mindfulness, and I think the work around porn. It's one of those things that we have to talk about, and yet we often don't. And if we, it stays in the shadow. So bless you for your work. How do people find out more about what you do, Jeremy?
Yeah, thanks for asking. If anyone wants to know more, probably if you're just curious about more about this topic, I have my own podcast. It's called Unhooked. And it's all about porn addiction and everything tangentially related. So any kind of addiction, and, we have coaches and therapists and all kinds of interesting guests on. So checking out Unhooked on any podcast platform. And then if you want to know more about the work I do, you can go to unhookedacademy.com, and all the info is there.
Great. I'll put that into the description so people can find out more. But yeah, bless you for your amazing work. And if I can support in any way, please let me know.
Appreciate that. And thanks for having me on. It was a real joy.
Pleasure. Take care.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this episode, please go back and look at the prior episodes. They're loaded with valuable insights and information on this journey of recovery. I really appreciate your attention, and thanks for being a part of this journey. See you later.